Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Atlantic Tales, when we'll visit a typical 19th century vernacular farmhouse located at Tullyvarraga in Shannon, where efforts are underway to restore the buildings to their former glory. Hastings Farmhouse is located at the Shannon estuary end of the original routeway into Tullyvarraga in Shannon, now known as the Sleenamara Boreen. The house appeared on the first edition Ordnance Survey map of 1840 and was lived in by the Hastings family until the early 1970s. Its fascinating history could have been totally lost and forgotten, except that local heritage group Dúchas na Seanna stepped in to conserve what remained of Hastings Farmhouse. That good work continues, and it's expected that 2026 will be a particularly significant year for the project. Let's hear first though about the Hastings family and who they were. John O'Brien is one of the founding members of the Shannon Archaeological and Historical Society and also a member of Dúchas na Seanna. His interest in the farmhouse extends beyond the actual property itself. He has researched the Hastings family extensively and found that one of his own great-grandmothers was a Hastings who was born in the farmhouse. The family history is quite extensive and very international.
The Hastings came here in the late 1840s. We don't know the precise date, but probably 1847 or 48, in the height of the famine. And before that, they were in Coona, in County Limerick, because we know that from the baptismal records in that parish. We see that the earlier children were born there and the later ones were born here. So the house was here before them, of course. So the house was vacant when they came. And we don't really know the circumstances of that. But it was the famine time, so maybe the family who were here had left. Maybe they'd immigrated, maybe they died, maybe they just moved on somewhere else or died out. But the whole area around here was controlled by the Kenny family who lived in Ballycasey House. They were the landlords, but they didn't own the place, they were middlemen. So they allotted out farms to tenants. And the farm that the Hastings arrived at had a vacant house and had 30 acres approximately. Very well-defined fields, so one could speculate that all this land was divided up to make viable farms to rent out. So they came here in 1847 or 8, and the Hastings were here up to 1968. The last one, John Hastings, died in that particular year. So there were 3 generations of them, really. John and Bridget, the original couple who came here with some children, they had a total of 9 children. They died early in their lives, really, and most people did, of course. Longevity wasn't great. Mrs. Hastings, the original Mrs. Hastings, died at the age of 50. 9 children here. Some of the children, of course, would have died very young as well, and some of them dying in their teens, for instance, so we kind of forget about the realities of life back then and how different it was then to now. There's a history of immigration to Australia in the family. Of the original family, 3 immigrated. James and Patrick were the first ones to go, and they went to Sydney, near Sydney in Australia. And of course, we kind of lose track of what happened to these people a lot of the time, but there are a lot of Hastings descendants in Australia at the moment, and they've done a lot of research. And some tragic stories and some unusual ones. One of the 2 brothers, the first 2 brothers to immigrate, committed suicide. He shot himself. It's written up in the newspapers. We don't know the circumstances there. The other man had a family and lived on and good life. And then the youngest son, Stephen, went. He was born in 1863 here. He was the youngest. And he went at the age of about 20. He got married and had children. And he went gold prospecting and he deserted the family. And the next they heard about him many, many years later, by chance, was he had been shot dead in San Francisco, of all places. So his children, 4 children, 2 of them died very young. Then there was a son and a daughter. And the son had a family, and they had families. So they're alive and well in Australia in big, big numbers at the moment, and very happily we're in contact with them, and they're highly interested in this particular story. We move on then to Daniel Hastings. He was one of the original children. He got married. He had family. And the last of his family to die, of course, was John or Jack, who lived here up to 1968. One of John's brothers immigrated during the War of Independence to Australia. And he lived in Sydney. And he had family. And they grew up. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that his offspring discovered the other ones through the connection back to this house with the help of Ancestry.com and Facebook and the World Wide Web, etc., you know. So there were two lots of cousins that lived within 20 or 30 miles of each other that had no knowledge of each other whatsoever. Again, I suppose the other family, there might not have been good relations there, you know, with writing back because of what happened and everything like that, you know, having been deserted and tough life and all that.
How much work, though, John, has gone in to that research? Because you're trawling through documentation here, Australia, you mentioned San Francisco, so
Yeah.
the trawl has been international.
Well, peculiarly, most of the work was done in Australia by the wife of one of the Hastings. And I got interested in genealogy a number of years ago, and I joined Ancestry.com. And suddenly, when I put in my Hastings great-grandmother, it linked me in with this Mrs. Hastings in Australia, and she had done Trojan work. So we got into correspondence then, of course, and I was able to answer lots of the questions she had and kind of do little minor corrections to what she'd done and everything. Genealogy is a very complicated thing, especially for using the online platforms, because some people make assumptions and wrong assumptions, and then somebody else takes that as gospel. So you have to kind of double check everything. You know, researching genealogy has become easier as well. The records that are online here are just astonishing. And then to supplement that, the records in Australia include shipping, immigrants arriving, that kind of thing, you know. So thankfully a lot of the work was done before I got involved in it.
But you have traced back your own family to...
Well, I have a personal connection with the Hastings, you see, and that's what led me on in the first place. One of my great-grandmothers was actually born here in 1855, and she married Patrick Hickey, who had family, and my mother was Hickey. So Mary Hastings was one of my great-grandmothers. And I used to be brought in here by my mother as a child, early 60s, to visit John and Maggie Hastings. But of course, I never inquired as to why we were coming in here. We were cousins, you know. I would have been a first cousin twice removed, I think. My mother was a cousin as well, of course. So
there's Hastings blood there. But
yes.
Did you know, when you started researching all of that there might be a connection to here?
Yeah, I figured that out fairly quickly, and I had a very elderly aunt who was still alive at the time, and she was pretty good at genealogy, and she answered a lot of the questions. So that's what got me onto it, in fact. And there were others of the family of Hastings who lived here, living locally as well. Two of the women, Bridget and Anne, and lived at the Hurler's Cross in the shop. And Bridget, I remember from my early childhood as well, she used to visit the house on and off, and I wondered why, you know, but never bothered to ask, or, you know, it was only idle curiosity, shall we say.
Do we know of any family members, relatives coming back here to visit to hear the story?
We do indeed, Pat. Peter and his wife came 20 or 30 years ago and returned a number of times, and they were descended from one of the grandsons of Stephen Hastings. So that alerted us to the fact that there were cousins in Australia in the first place. Now, in 2019 I actually visited Australia, and I met Peter and I met some others of his cousins who were hugely interested as well. They'd be descended from another one of the Hastings. They'd be first cousins. More recently, Greg Hastings arrived here. He'd be another cousin as well. He visited the site and is hugely interested. And then out of the blue, through the website that we run, Roundabout Shannon, we got a message from an Anthony Hastings wondering, could this house have anything to do with his family? And I got in email contact with him, and it transpires that he was descended from the nephew of Stephen and never knew of all the other ones. So he hasn't actually been here yet, but I have actually met him in Dublin. He was just there for a day and I went to meet him. So there's huge interest. And of course there's a lot of descendants in Australia who do not have the name Hastings. There were daughters as well who married, so there's a number of families really There's Ryans and there's Wilmots as far as I'm aware, and there's others. So when the time comes and we generate more publicity about this particular project, I'm sure the net will widen and we'll get to know more of them.
Hastings Farmhouse was occupied until the early 1970s, but unfortunately, shortly after it was vacated, it was vandalised and its thatched roof set on fire. Later, it collapsed in on itself, and over a period of 40 years, vegetation grew up in and around the buildings. Up to a few years ago, the site of Hastings Farmhouse was completely overgrown and unrecognisable, but an amount of work has been carried out to reverse the damage. Olive Carey is also a member of Dúchas na Seanna.
The very first evidence of the house being here was when it appeared on the 1840 6-inch Ordnance Survey, the first edition of the Ordnance Survey maps. And we can see that the house was here at that point in 1840. How long before that? We don't know. We reckon somewhere between 1800 perhaps and the 1840. We have reference to the Hastings family here from about 1856, when it appears that John Hastings owned 29 acres here, and it was in Griffith's valuation of 1856. We know that the man who lived here right up until 1968 or thereabouts, before he died, he was born in 1880 in this house. He was the eldest of a family of 4, himself, his brother Thomas, and 2 sisters, Bridget and Anne. The father of the family died, unfortunately, around 1890, we think. So his mother, Mary, brought up the family here from that time onwards. As far as the house goes, it was a very traditional direct entry house. If anybody's been to any of the houses in Bunratty Folk Park, they'll see a house very similar to this. It's quite large. It's often been called Hastings Cottage. We call it Hastings Farmhouse because that's what the local people and that's what the Hastings family themselves called it, a farmhouse. So it's large for this type of traditional house. Oftentimes there were opposing doors, so a front door and a back door, so depending on what way the wind was blowing would determine which door was open at any one time. So you walked directly into the kitchen. The fire was in the hearth. It was fed by a bellows, and all the cooking of the house was done on the fire. There was no electricity, obviously, no running water in the house. There was a well close by where the family got their water, and lighting was candles or kerosene lamp or whatever, but all the cooking of the house was done on the fire. Behind the fire breast, I suppose, there was a parlour, and at the opposite end of the house were 2 small bedrooms with a loft overhead. So I do have a photograph here that was taken about 1967 or thereabouts. It shows John Hastings standing outside the house, and you can see that it was in full repair and livable at that point. It's a thatched house, had a hip roof, which means that the walls were the same height all the way around. There was no gable end as such, the roof was the same all the way around. Unfortunately, after Mr. Hastings passed away in the late 1960s, the house was vacant for a couple of years, and then it was vandalised and the thatched roof was set on fire. So after that, what happens, with a house like that, once its roof is gone, it just collapsed in, and the growth grew up around it. And over time, the house was more or less forgotten. Now, not forgotten completely, because local people who were around at the time and would have known Mr. Hastings, obviously they knew that the house was here. Many of Shannon's residents and who were maybe children at the time in the early 1960s would remember coming down around here, going on great adventures to discover this house. At that time, of course, it was very far away from any of the residential areas in Shannon. But
Shannon was still a very young town.
it was a very young town.
And geographically located between the crematorium and Ilonamana Cemetery, none of which would have been here. Out in the countryside.
It was in the countryside, yes, absolutely. We're quite close to the Shannon estuary here, probably within about 75 metres or so, even though we can't see it right from the house. And that just goes to show as well how beautifully situated this house is. It's situated right in the lee of a hillside, on top of which is now Ilonamana Cemetery. And there is some evidence that they actually cut into the hill to create this site here. It's a nice sheltered site, and oftentimes there can be gales blowing, but you'll be nicely sheltered here at this house. So it went on from the late 1960s, and for about 40 years the house was just left fall into disrepair and go derelict and become more and more obscured by the vegetation. And then in 2012, Dúchas na Seanna, a local heritage group here in Shannon, decided to uncover what was left of the house at that stage. And we had a lovely volunteer day here, and we got some funding from Clare Local Development Company, from the Leader Fund, and we set about just conserving what was left of the house at that stage. It is the last standing remains of a number of houses that would have been located along the Tullyvarraga Boreen. People know the stone house at the opposite end of the Boreen, just across the road from the Oakwood. It's still a thatched house, and that was built around 1914, quite a bit later than this house, Hastings. Many Shannon residents would also remember O'Gorman's cottage on the Boreen, and that was intact until the 1970s, maybe even into the 80s, before it fell to the same fate. But this was the last surviving actual remnant of one of those very early houses coming from the 19th century.
2012 is when the work first started here at Hastings Farmhouse. What was the plan?
Well, when we came in here first, and I'm thinking the very first time we began to formulate the plan in our mind was around 2009, and we came in to just have a look at that point to see what was here, and a local farmer was housing some cattle in here and feeding his calves right just outside the door of the house, and we were literally up to our knees in muck. And you couldn't get in here without your wellies. But there was very little of the house to be seen because of the overgrowth. And then it took some time. And the first thing we thought about doing was approaching the Conservation Officer in Clare County Council to see if we could have this structure declared a protected structure. So in fact that was done, and in 2011 I think it was declared a protected structure. So ever after that, what we wanted to ensure is that what was here would be conserved, and that nobody could come in and just obliterate it or get a bulldozer and we wanted that protection there. So it is now there in the legalities as a protected structure, which means that we have to apply anytime that we want to do some work. There are some conditions attached to it being a protected structure, so we would have to go through those formalities. So in 2012, when we'd gotten the funding together to do the conservation works and we began to uncover the walls as they were, then we actually began to realise that a good portion of the walls were actually mud structure. It was an earthen built house. Now there was stone involved as well, and in the fireplace itself in particular there were bricks which were probably locally made. So it was a surprise to us to find this mud structure, because the houses in this area and really the whole west of Ireland would normally be built of stone because that's readily available. But this house, finding that there was an earthen structure here, was really interesting to us then. So we set about uncovering what was left, what remained of the house, and then we put a capping on the walls in order to preserve them. But actually, as the years were going on after that, we realised that the capping was allowing moisture down into the walls, into the mud walls, and of course mud and moisture don't mix very well. And it was in 2019, after a particularly bad storm, and we saw some damage to the walls, and it was after that that we began to realise. We actually did get some expert advice on it. A cob expert from England actually came over to look at the structure, and his advice to us was, well, he said, you can leave it and do nothing at all, and it will eventually just disappear. And that just wasn't a prospect that we could countenance. So he said, if you want to preserve it, you really need to put a roof on it. As he said, a house like this needs a good hat and good boots. So that sowed the seeds then of what now? How do we go about preserving this house? Another idea was just to maybe put some kind of a structure over the whole thing and try and protect it from the weather. But we really felt that it was worth preserving and worth bringing back to life and bringing it back as a community venue. So we began the process then of doing what needed to be done, both for ourselves as a community organisation. We had to formalise our legal status. We had to become a company limited by guarantee. We started doing that process. Then we registered to be a charity. So that process started at that point as well. And then we began discussions with Clare County Council to take on the lease of the building. And that took some time, but we got there in the end. We now have a lease for the building, the house itself, the outhouse which is attached to it, and 2 acres of land around. Clare County Council were very helpful to us and facilitated us by having a conservation report.
Coming up, we'll meet some of those involved in the work to restore Hastings Farmhouse, the excavations that have taken place there, and the future plans for the project. Welcome back to Atlantic Tales. On the edge of Shannon, County Clare, close to the estuary in the townland of Tullyvarraga, stands what's left of Hastings Farmhouse, a typical 19th century vernacular building. The house was lived in by the Hastings family until the early 1970s. It was later vandalised and its thatched roof set on fire. All is not lost for the old Hastings homestead, however, as a major project to restore the site is underway. Dúchas na Seanna was set up in 2005 as an umbrella body for all heritage and cultural groups within Shannon town. The project-based organisation was set up with the aim of researching and promoting the heritage of Shannon and its environs. Greg Duff was one of the founder members of Dúchas na Seanna.
Many years ago there was in the leisure centre, the local leisure centre, there was an opportunity for various community groups to tell the community what they were about. And I was at a stand with Annie Wise, who would have been the representative of Antashka. And from that event, different organisations expressed an interest in having a heritage group, a local heritage group, which hadn't existed in the town up to then. So Cumran na Gaeilge was part of it, and Antashka, Boardwatch Ireland, John Murphy was another person. There were other individuals that were interested in heritage and in community. So there was an initial meeting, I think, in the town council office. The various groups came on board, and that was the beginning of Dúchas na Seanna. So you could say probably about 6 community groups came together along with interested individuals. And I suppose it's important to remember that Cumran na Gaeilge was one of the leading groups, and that's why to this day Dúchas na Seanna has a commitment to the Irish language, and our literature usually shows that aspect of our commitment to the language.
So even though Shannon is, or was then, still a relatively new town, there was still history, still heritage, still history to uncover and research.
Oh yes, and I suppose my interest was that, but also in the history of our independence movement and the role, particularly with the local brigade, that this house plays a part of, and then up to the capture of the general, General Lucas. So it's going back to the famine time, it's going back when there was no town here, but it also has a very historical spot in relation to the War of Independence in Clare.
When did you first become aware of Hastings Farmhouse?
I knew that there was an old building here. I wouldn't have known the name, to be perfectly honest with you. And I would say it was about 2006 that there was a beginning of an interest. I know that it's recorded that 2012 we formally set up Dukas, but I think there was a beginning of an interest a few years before that. And when we came here, the whole place was covered in briars. You couldn't see the walls or the floors or anything like that. So there's a photo there, and you can see the lineup in the photo. There's a great, I suppose, community group spread right across, factory workers, factory managers, members of Shannon Development, all the community coming together. It has lasted a long, long time, that group, to stay together, and there's been loads of events down here that have tied in the interest to share our history and our heritage with the local community, and that's would be an important role of Dukas.
It could easily have been lost had it not been for locals taking an interest in it.
Yeah.
Even more overgrown, and maybe even demolished.
Well, you see, that comes back to that it was originally a thatched house, and then through vandalism, unfortunately, the thatch was set on fire. It was used as a drinking den. This wouldn't be unusual to any urban centre. It's surrounded by a rural area and with heritage spots. But the progress that has been made has been something fantastic. And even when in the darkest period, when everyone just gave up on what they thought was just a few stones together, they kept in, and now with the plans, jumping ahead, that we can foresee the roof being put on and this being used again in a way for the community, and that would be our aim long term, Do
you remember coming down the first day and seeing it all overgrown and the work that took place afterwards?
I don't come from a farming background, so to come down and see where you could not see any walls or stones, it just total briars. It would put off anyone, but in fairness, we got stuck in and it was cleared off. And there's lots of work that has gone down over the years, like with the mud brick making and the workshops. So there's been a lot of workshops held over, particularly in the last, I'd say, 5 years. So people have seen that it's part of our heritage, but it's a living heritage to the sense that you can be active within the project.
PJ Ryan is a former mayor of Clare, but also a member of Dukas na Shona. He has also been involved with the Hastings Farmhouse project.
I saw the value, in the fact that it was one of the last thatched buildings in the area, and that's how I really became involved in it, I suppose at the stage that I joined Dukas, it still was owned by Clare County Council at that stage, Originally Clare County Council acquired it from Shannon Development when they took over the infrastructure around Shannon, I think in the late 90s. And I saw the value in it through being a member of the Historical and Archaeological Society, and I thought it was a project that was worth actually following up on. Then we decided at a meeting one night that the best thing to do maybe to bring it back to originality, which I think was a great idea, and everybody agreed with it. So we then had to speak to the people in Clare County Council to acquire a lease in it, which was a rather slow process. To get any kind of decent funding for it, we had to have a minimum of a 30-year lease, which wasn't easy. But I used whatever bit of influence I had through being an elected member of Clare County Council to have that lease, put in place, and we have it in place now, which is invaluable.
It was a long process, as you say. Was there ever a concern? Were you ever afraid that the local authority mightn't see the value in it and that they mightn't be able to allow it come as far as it has with the local group?
Well, I suppose being a local authority, they were used to carrying out big projects and all that, and every project they were involved in was all huge figures, and we did have a problem with that, and they did have a problem with that. They said, as a voluntary group, we don't think that you'll be ever able to manage to get enough funding, to achieve our aim, and that was a bit of a job to convince them that we would, like, and we were proved right, like, you know, in recent times there when we had backers and sponsors who were willing to come behind the project and fund it and sponsor it. So, you know, that was one of the big achievements, like, I thought anyway, like, you know.
What do you remember of seeing the site, the old site, all overgrown for the first time yourself?
Yeah, well, it looked like a wilderness, like, you know, but, you know, the thing about it is, like, I come from Cratloe, only a few miles down the road, like, and of course I would have met a lot of local people who would have access to the house when it was functioning at the time, like, you know, and everybody seemed to think, like, that Hastings Farmhouse, you know, was actually one of the buildings, like, around here, like, you know, that was renowned, like, and that a lot of people had access to, like, the Hastings seemed to be very friendly people, and, you know, they had people visiting here, what they call, in the old days, they used to come and court here, you know, like, they'd come in the night, like, and they'd be telling stories and finish up at maybe 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, like, having plenty of tea and what we would call it as old cake bread and things like that, like, you know. But that was one of the things, like, that I figured, you know, we shouldn't lose that, like, you know, that we should be able to maintain, you know, the local involvement and the history relating back to it. And of course, like, Hastings Farmhouse is a building here, like, that has been around, like, since the 1800s, like, you know, so why would we lose it? It's better off to try and preserve it, like. There's a laneway down here by the side of it, you know, which would be referred to as a boreen or a boateen. It has 2 stone walls in it, like, which was, you know, a reasonable structure at the time, like, that somebody went into the trouble of putting it, but it actually leads down to the estuary, and, like, there are rather a lot of questions, like, what was it for? Like, was it for taking something up from the estuary, or was it for people going fishing, or, you know, giving the Hastings Hoare farmers access to the water of the estuary, like, you know, we're a bit, you know, at sea as to know what the original purposes was, like.
But you would imagine it was intentional, it was strategic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it was strategic, like, and it was intentional. It was put there for a purpose, like, and somebody went to the trouble of building stone walls at each side of it, like, you know. Like, you know, we're all well aware, like, there are plenty pathways through farmyards and through fields and all that, like, but somebody actually went to the trouble of putting 2 stone walls at each side of this little road, like, you know, and that's part of what we want to preserve here as well, like.
It's still a huge project, from the first day clearing the site to what will be the finished product in the years to come, please God. Did you ever think it wasn't doable?
No, we never saw failure as an end result. Never. Any of the members would never see failure. Like, you know, once we took it on, we were going to follow it through to the end, like, you know, and we were proved right in the end. Like, the only big stumbling block was to know, would we be able to get enough funding to achieve what we want to achieve.
Ron Kerwin is Communications Officer with Dúchas na Seanna. Now retired, he has more time to pursue his interest in history and archaeology.
I'm involved in Shannon Archaeological and Historical Society, but I was interested in history. And for a long time after I retired, I didn't get a chance really to get involved, but I started going to the meetings. A friend of mine, Colin McGarry, unfortunately, Colin died, brought me into it really, and I stuck with it then after that. But he had a great interest in it, and I had a great interest in history, a great interest in Shannon, the community, and to me it's all about people, the Hastings family. I often think about them living here and the people that lived with them, that worked for them, because this would have been a pretty sizable farm at the time, and they went through the famine, and they went through the Land League and the wars and the independence and everything like that. As part of the history, they hosted Brigadier General Lucas, who was captured by the IRA down in Cork and brought through Limerick and across the river into County Clare, Bunratty and down Meelick, I think direction he was. He ended up here, and he was here for a while, and got on fantastically with the people, and they treated him well. And as he said himself, he was later, when he was released, he was treated as a gentleman by gentlemen. So the people, to me, the key is the people. The building, fine. The people, I liked the people, and I liked the whole idea of what they were doing here and what we're going to do with it in the future, of course. It's great. It's going to be fantastic for Shannon, you know. There's a shortage of places, even for people to meet and to do things. Even now, I got involved with Cuivno and Clar, and I can picture sessions of people, you know, playing these recordings and all that. Again, it's all part of the fabric of this community, you know, and I think there's going to be a great future there.
Coming up, we'll hear about an archaeological dig undertaken on the site of Hastings Farmhouse, its links with the War of Independence, and from a man who met John Hastings back in the 60s. Welcome back to Atlantic Tales. Hastings Farmhouse is located close to the estuary in Shannon, on the original routeway into Tullyvarraga, now known as the Sleenamara Boreen. Efforts to conserve and restore the site have been underway for a number of years, but the farmhouse's fascinating story could easily have been forgotten but for the work of local heritage group Dúchas na Seanna. An archaeological dig carried out at the site uncovered some artefacts, but also interesting hidden details about the main farmhouse. Ron Kerwin was one of those involved in that dig.
Olive asked an archaeologist, Elaine Lynch, to do a dig, and she agreed to do a 3-day dig, and we did the first 3 days of National Heritage Week in August. And the weather was pretty good, actually. It was quite warm. I think we were lucky at the time. I remember it raining a lot afterwards, so we were lucky. And we were lucky we had an event here as well on the Sunday of that week, and it was fantastic, beautiful weather, everything. But the dig itself, half a dozen or so of us came down, and we did 3 sites. One of them was here at the doorway of this barn. One was in the parlour, and that was a very interesting one. And then we did another one on the far side, outside. So the first one, there really wasn't an awful lot found here at the doorway. Tiny little pieces of delf and little artefacts, tiny little things, you know, nothing much. But I had great fun because my knees wouldn't allow me to get down and dig, but I got to use the metal detector. And it was brilliant, you know, and it was very accurate, it was very good to be able to, little beeps and all. But what we found was equally important. The particular areas that yielded a great result were the parlour. At the back of the parlour there's a fire, and there's a bellows operated fire for, you know, and Olive and Tom Chambers down on their knees and dug a hole down in the floor and sieving everything and all that, and they found a drain. We believe that the drain was used to allow air to come in from outside the house under the ground, and it fed the bellows. It looked fantastic. And the other area that we found, we cut out a piece on the far side of the building, and we uncovered cobblestone area, and hopefully next year we'll do a further dig and uncover a lot more of it, you know, because it was brilliant to see the cobblestones that were in use daily by everyone in the farm, you know.
And when you go digging, you never know what you're going to find, whether you're going to find anything at all.
Yeah.
That must have been very exciting.
It was, it was dramatic, wasn't it? It was really dramatic to find, especially the drain, because it came from outside under the floor and into the parlour, into the back of the fireplace, you know what I mean? Where we know there was a bellows, because we've seen pictures of the bellow at the fireplace, you know, so it just made sense the way it was used.
So it seems like the Hastings were creative and innovative and knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I had a bit of a theory at the time, I remember thinking about it, that it may have been put in to encourage. John Hastings didn't get married till 1930, you know, and he would have been 50 or so then. It might have been kind of modernising the place, you know what I mean, to encourage his wife to come into the house. So that amused me anyway. So.
Are there plans for further digs? Because you chose 3 particular areas. The parlour area was probably going to yield more than any place else, but the cobblestones was a huge find as well. But we don't know what we're standing on, really.
No, we don't. You know, at the moment now there's a team being put together of experts to look at that build and look at anything to do with it, you know, all the factors that to do with it. And I'd imagine certainly will be having a good look. We don't even know yet what's going to happen in the build itself, whether it's going to be all taken away and rebuilt from the ground up or what. I know we're going to put underfloor heating and stuff like that, you know, so I'll have to do some sort of work there anyway, you know.
Sean O'Noonan moved to live and work in Shannon in the 1960s. He was later instrumental in setting up many of the Irish language and cultural organisations within the town. He is a member of Dúchas na Seanna and remembers the first time he visited the site of Hastings Farmhouse and meeting the late John Hastings.
When we were surveying the area with the Garlands engineers, all this area was marshy and good grazing on and off, but very boggy. And we came down the Sleenamara Road, and this was isolated, and met John. exactly the way he's standing in the photograph. This area here, we're right on the estuary. This was here long before the house, it was long before the town, everything. You had the main thoroughfare outside there, passing up and down between Limerick and Clare, right through the country. So you had a footfall here of the earlier settlements. And indeed, there's one small spot just up there shown as an ancient site. Very small, never taken any further than that. Right along the way, there was something happening.
And you saw the cottage as it was, spoke to John Hastings at the time.
And his dog was there with it.
Years later then, you would have heard or would have known that it was falling into disrepair. What do you remember of that? Because you saw it, as we say, in its former glory.
Yeah. First of all, the sheer fact that the devastation of it was a heartbreak, because we had so little of that to fall back in here. I mean, we had plenty rivers of concrete and we had very little of this left. As we stand here, I mean, the people that stood here they're building this, cutting it out of the hill, magnificent people, and they didn't have to wait years for planning permission.
Hastings Farmhouse appeared in the first Ordnance Survey map in 1840, but was built some time before this. The Hastings family moved into the property during the famine, having lived previously in Coona. There is a lot of history associated with the farmhouse, particularly from the days of Ireland's revolutionary period. John O'Brien has researched the Hastings family extensively, as well as the history of the old homestead.
And of course there's a connection with the War of Independence. When I was visiting here, I didn't really realise that, and I wish I had, because I could have spoken directly to one of the men who was directly involved. That was John Hastings, who was 28 years of age when General Lucas was held here as a hostage, more or less, for a number of nights, having been captured in Fermoy with the hope of bartering him for Republican prisoners. Then he had to be moved through County Cork, County Limerick, across the river to Moyhill near Bunratty, and then through a number of houses in this locality, including Hastings. So John Hastings was one of the minders, shall we say. This was the safe house. It was extremely remote in one way, because to get to it by road it took ages and ages. But just behind your back, of course, is the River Shannon, so you could get away fairly quickly by boat if you needed to. So in that sense, it was a very attractive, safe house. John Hastings is mentioned in some of the witness statements for various actions that were taken around here, you know, raiding the RIC station in Newmarket and Fergus, burning the station in Bunratty, and raiding other houses as well, kind of establishment houses for guns and that. So John Hastings took a fairly active part. Peculiarly, he never applied for an IRA pension, whereas his sisters did. They were very active in coming them on. You know, that's a peculiarity, but I'm told that a lot of people who were on the Republican side in the Civil War refused to take money from the Free State. So maybe that was the basis for that. I don't know.
Work to restore Hastings Farmhouse is all about linking the past with the present and ensuring locals and the wider public know the story of the farmhouse and the Hastings family. A lot of conservation work has been carried out since the site was first cleared, all of which has laid the groundwork for the extensive restoration project which will now take place. Olive Carey.
The vision is that this is brought back to its original condition. The house itself was thatched. We have even run some workshops on mud wall building, so we want to restore the walls in that vernacular tradition. So there will be mud walls. The house itself will be thatched. The outhouse, which is attached to the house, we have photographs of it from the 1960s, and it had a corrugated iron roof on. So that's what we will do. We'll restore it like that. And then we're going to build another small service building which will have the kitchen and toilet, and that will be in the corner at the back of the house there. But our vision is that this house will be used for the community. We'll restore the actual house and equip it as it would have looked when it was lived in. The barn and outbuilding here That will be equipped with all the facilities that will be needed for it to function, perhaps for workshops, for events. It will have Wi-Fi and all of what will be needed for it to function well in that. And we hope that this will be then a centre for traditional arts, crafts, buildings. We'd hope to continue with workshops so that people can learn how to keep old buildings like this and maybe even to build using these traditional techniques. It is kind of almost a test case for this kind of a building and use of these buildings. There are no actual regulations about building in mud in Ireland, so this will be, it'll be closely monitored and a record kept of all the processes involved. We're very fortunate that we've secured funding. The Michael Guinea Foundation are coming in behind us. We're very grateful to them for that, and we will be applying to LEADER as well for funding. It's all in the very late stages now of the preparation work has all been done. We secured planning permission this year. We hope to be ready to go by spring or early summer next year. My family came to Shannon in 1963. It was a brand new town just beginning. You couldn't even call it a town at that point. It was just a series of housing estates for people who were working in the factories. But those people came from everywhere because there was no town of Shannon before that. So early 1960s, people are coming from all over Ireland, back from England, which is what my family did, because of the availability of jobs and houses. And it wasn't even from just Irish people. There were a lot of foreign people living in Shannon at that time. These would have been the families of industrialists who had come into the industrial estate. But there was a sense of unrootedness. Nobody came from here. And I think this building links that. It provides a sense of rootedness to the community of Shannon, in that they can come and see that there was actually something here. It's not that Shannon just beamed down from somewhere and was a town here, that there actually was a landscape, a farmed landscape here, and that people were living here and that we can connect to them. And I think for future generations as well, we often have school groups come down and we talk to them about what life was like for the Hastings family here, and they look at us and when there was no television and no anything. But it provides that sense of continuity and rootedness and pride of place, I think. So we're very excited to be involved in this project and happy to be providing, I suppose, a legacy for future generations of Shannon people.
It needs it really does. The community needs it, and the facility itself is going to be a huge help to everybody here. In a way, it'll open this area to the town. A lot of people don't know where this is even, Even the site itself, we're talking about the greenway coming in a few years' time, and this is ideally sited to connect with that greenway, so that opens this up again. And also educational facilities will have the space to do all that sort of thing, but social occasions, community occasions, anything for the community, it'll be huge.
Well, we're living in a changing world, and it's important for us to realise how the Republic came into being, what the history, and especially when this goes back to the famine times, we're talking about a different type of history that we're living in now. So it's important to know where our roots were and to teach it to people. We're becoming a multicultural society, but in terms of the Irish language and in terms of the Irish history, it's important to hold on to that, and that future generations will know the struggles of the people that had to work the land, and a lot of them forced, even within the Hastings family, to go abroad,
Well, especially in the town of Shannon, I think this is unique, and it has a different type of importance, in fact, because it's in total contrast with everything else that there is in Shannon. It's a link back to the landscape that was here before the town. So I think it'll be hugely educational. It'll be a great resource for the community. It'll be a centre for various events, cultural, music, singing, training, maybe a little art gallery, things like that. So, and we have 2 acres around it, of course, as well, and it's going almost down to the River Shannon. So it's a unique location, very peaceful and tranquil, and We're going to do really wonderful things with the whole site in due course, but this is phase one, to get these houses restored and functioning again.
I think it's vitally important. We can forget history very easily and it comes back to bite us. People forget. But if we remember what people did and what happened, then we learn. And we want this restored and are right on the point of fulfilling the dreams of all those who were here before and cut it out of the hills. Big Lord and Beirach, agus is a ska céile a waran na daoine. People live in the shadow of each other, and the future lives in the shadow of the past.